Imagine a calm, grey sea. The morning mist hangs low over the water, muffling all sound. For the people living on the coast of a quiet English monastery or a small Frankish village, the day begins as any other. The world is small, predictable and safe. But then, something appears on the horizon. It is a silhouette, long and slender, with a fearsome dragon's head carved into its prow. At first there is only one. Soon it is joined by another, and then another, until a fleet of these magnificent, terrifying vessels glides silently toward the shore. This was often the first sight of the Vikings, a moment that would forever be etched into the memory of Europe. The arrival of the longships was the arrival of a storm. These were not simply boats, they were masterpieces of naval engineering, able to navigate both the wild, open ocean and the shallowest of rivers. This gave the Northmen an unparalleled advantage. They could appear as if from nowhere, striking deep into the heart of a kingdom before any warning could be given. The people they encountered were often unprepared for the ferocity and speed of their raids. The Vikings sought portable wealth, gold, silver, and slaves, and they took it with a brutal efficiency that sent ripples of fear across the continent, from Ireland to the Caspian Sea. While the sagas and chronicles of their victims often speak of fire and the sword, the Vikings wielded other tools with equal skill. One of their most important possessions was a small, portable set of scales. These were used not for dividing spoils, but for weighing silver, the currency of their vast trading network. The same man who might raid a monastery on Monday could be a shrewd merchant on Tuesday. The Viking was a complex figure, a warrior and a trader, often at the same time. The axe opened the door, but it was commerce that often kept it open. Their journeys were not always for plunder. Many longships sailed with the intention of peaceful trade from the very start. They established bustling market towns, places like Hedeby in Denmark or Birka in Sweden. Here, you could find silks from Byzantium, glassware from the Frankish Empire, and spices from the distant east. The Vikings were the great connectors of their age, their ships forming a web that stretched from the icy shores of Greenland to the bustling markets of Constantinople and Baghdad. They were masters of logistics and navigation, moving goods across staggering distances. The ambition of the Vikings knew few horizons. Their longships, those elegant vessels of exploration, carried them to the very edges of the known world, and sometimes beyond. To the west, they braved the treacherous North Atlantic. They settled the Faroe Islands, a remote archipelago shrouded in mist. From there, they pushed onward to Iceland, a land of fire and ice. They did not stop there. Eric the Red, exiled from Iceland, led a party of settlers even further west, to the vast green coastline of a land he named Greenland, a clever piece of marketing to attract followers. His son, Leif Erikson, would venture further still. Around the year 1000, long before Columbus set sail, his ship made landfall on the shores of North America, a place he called Vinland. They established a small, short-lived settlement, a tiny European footprint on a vast, unknown continent. To the east, their journeys were just as remarkable. Swedish Vikings, known as the Russ, rowed their ships down the great rivers of Eastern Europe. They navigated the Dnieper and the Volga, portaging their ships overland when necessary, their sights set on the riches of the south and east. These eastern adventurers reached the Black Sea and the Caspian Sea. With such a vast reach and undeniable military strength, a question naturally arises. Why did the Vikings not forge a lasting unified empire? They conquered kingdoms, founded dynasties, and struck fear into the hearts of emperors and kings. Yet a single cohesive Viking empire never came to be. The answer, it seems, lies not with their enemies but within themselves. It is found in the very culture that made them such successful explorers and raiders in the first place. At its core, Norse society was built upon a fierce and uncompromising sense of personal independence and loyalty to a local chieftain. This was a world without a strong, centralized authority. A Viking's primary allegiance was not to a distant king or a national identity, but to his immediate lord, his family, and his shipmates. Power was personal and charismatic. A successful chieftain could command immense loyalty, but that loyalty was conditional on his ability to provide wealth, land, and glory. If a leader failed, or if a better opportunity presented itself elsewhere, a warrior was free to seek his fortune under a new banner. This fluid, decentralized structure was perfect for organizing small-scale raids and exploratory ventures. However, this same structure was a profound weakness when it came to building and maintaining a large, stable empire. Among the many cultural traditions that, really hindered the creation of a lasting Viking empire, one stands out for its simple, yet devastating consequences. It was a system of inheritance, common in many parts of the Norse world, that could be called a form of gavelkind. Under this principle, a man's property, his land, his titles, his wealth, was not passed down intact to his eldest son. Instead, it was divided among all his legitimate heirs, and sometimes his illegitimate ones as well. What one generation built with great effort, the next was culturally obligated to break into smaller pieces. Imagine a powerful Viking jarl who, through a lifetime of raiding and shrewd politics, carves out a significant kingdom for himself. He rules a large territory, commands a strong army, and amasses great wealth. Upon his death, however, his kingdom is not treated as a single, indivisible state. Instead, it is partitioned. Each of his sons receives a portion of the land, a share of the treasure, and a fraction of the army. A unified and powerful realm is instantly transformed into a collection of smaller, weaker, and often rivalrous territories. The work of a lifetime is undone in a single generation. This tradition was a recipe for chronic instability and internal conflict. Brothers who had once fought side by side for their father were now pitted against one another as competitors. Perhaps the clearest example of this self-destructive tendency can be seen in the story of the Great Heathen Army. In the year 865, a massive Viking force, unlike any seen before, landed in England. It was not a small raiding party, but a coalition of armies led by several legendary chieftains, including the sons of the famous Ragnar Lothbrok. Their goal was not simply plunder, but conquest. For nearly a decade, this army swept across the Anglo-Saxon kingdoms, conquering Northumbria, East Anglia, and much of Mercia. Only the southern kingdom of Wessex, under Alfred the Great, held out against them. The Vikings established a vast territory under their control, an area that would come to be known as the Danelaw. They seemed poised to conquer the entire island of England, to create a true and lasting Viking kingdom. By the late 870s, they had come tantalizingly close. Alfred of Wessex was a fugitive, hiding in the marshes. It appeared that the final victory was within their grasp. This was the pinnacle of Viking military achievement, a moment of supreme power. But then, at the very moment of their greatest success, the old patterns began to reassert themselves. The great army was a coalition, not a monolith. The chieftains who led it were proud independent men, each with his own ambitions. Not all Viking stories end in fracture and dissolution. There is another path they sometimes took, a path that also prevented the formation of a singular Viking empire. This was the path of assimilation. The tale of the Viking chieftain Rollo provides a perfect illustration. For years, Rollo and his followers had been a scourge upon the kingdom of West Francia, sailing their longships up the River Seine. They repeatedly raided the countryside and even besieged Paris. They were a persistent and seemingly unsolvable problem for the Frankish king Charles the Simple. Charles, unable to defeat Rollo in battle, chose a different strategy. In the year 911, he offered the Viking leader a deal. He would grant Rollo a vast and fertile territory in the north of his kingdom, the land that would eventually become known as Normandy, the land of the Northmen. In exchange, Rollo had to do two things. First, he had to swear fealty to Charles, becoming his vassal and protecting the kingdom from any future Viking raids. Second, he and his men had to accept Christianity and be baptized. It was a brilliant and pragmatic solution for both sides. Rollo accepted. He and his warriors settled the land, marrying local women and adopting the Christian faith. Within a generation, these fierce Viking raiders began a remarkable transformation. The Viking Age did not end with a gentle fading away. It concluded with a dramatic and violent final act, one that perfectly encapsulates the themes of internal conflict and misplaced ambition that defined their story. The year is 1066, a date famous in English history. The King of England, Edward the Confessor, has died without an heir, leaving a power vacuum. Several claimants vie for the throne, including the English Earl Harold Godwinson and the Duke of Normandy William. But there was a third claimant, a true Viking in the old style. His name was Harald Hardrada, the King of Norway. His name, Hardrada, means hard ruler, and he was perhaps the last of the great Viking warrior kings. He assembled a massive fleet, some 300 ships, and sailed for England to claim his prize. He landed in the north of England and was initially successful, defeating a local English army. The English king, Harold Godwinson, found himself in a terrible position. Upon hearing of Hardrada's invasion in the north, Godwinson did something extraordinary. He force-marched his army nearly 200 miles in just 4 days, a stunning feat of speed and logistics. He caught the Norwegian army completely by surprise at a place called Stamford Bridge. The battle was a catastrophe for the Vikings. Caught unprepared, many without their full armor, they were decisively defeated. Harold Hardrada himself, fighting ferociously in the vanguard, was killed by an arrow to the throat. His great invasion was shattered, and so the great tide of Viking expansion receded. The dream of a unified empire, ruled from Scandinavia, never came to pass. Their failure to achieve this was not due to a lack of courage, skill, or ambition. They were masters of the sea, brilliant strategists, and fearsome warriors who could stand against any army in Europe. Their enemies, from Anglo-Saxon kings to Byzantine emperors, were formidable, but the greatest obstacle the Vikings faced was never an external one. The limits of their power were drawn by the contours of their own culture. Their fierce independence, the very quality that made them such daring explorers, prevented them from building the centralized bureaucratic states necessary for a lasting empire. Their traditions of inheritance, which divided kingdoms among a ruler's sons, ensured that whatever was built by one generation was often fractured by the next. Their internal rivalries and personal ambitions consistently undermined their collective strength. The legacy they left behind is therefore not one of a single great empire like that of Rome. There is no Viking equivalent of the Colosseum or Hadrian's Wall. Their empire was not one of stone and mortar, but one of movement and connection. It was an empire of waterways. Their legacy is etched into the river systems of Russia, the coastlines of Britain and France, and the sea lanes of the North Atlantic. It lives on in the DNA of the populations they mingled with, in the place names of northern England, and in the founding of cities like Dublin and Kiev. In the quiet of the evening, we can think of them not as a failed empire, but as a transformative force of nature. Like a great seasonal flood, they poured out of their northern homeland, reshaping the landscape wherever they went. They connected disparate cultures, spurred innovation in shipbuilding and warfare, and drove the political consolidation of their opponents. The Vikings did not conquer Europe, but in a deeper, more profound sense, they helped to create it. Their story is a gentle reminder that a people's greatest strengths can sometimes also be the source of their most profound limitations.